Well, I think the revolution is spatial. So part of the political sense of revolution, I think the revolution that happened was a spatial revolution because it totally transformed the way we live in the city. We discovered the city. I mean, even now, 3 years later, when I pass by spaces that hosted the event during the revolution, I can't unsee what happened. So these events are kind of stuck to the image of the spaces. So first of all, I think it's a complete spatial revolution because it's changed the way we perceive these spaces and we live in them. And I think it created a new common experience to all Lebanese people, especially people from our generation, who didn't really have a strong connection with the city itself and with its political, kind of in the big sense of political history. So it created a strong bond with our generation, the Lebanon, and the spaces it offers. Even when we go outside of Lebanon, because most of us sadly are, there's still this very strong connection with what happened during the revolution. So I think these two parts are a thing that's gonna last in time. So I hope it's gonna make us change on the long term the way we perceive the spaces, to make us maybe come back and change the country.
The geography of the 2019 protests can be analyzed at different scales. The first one is the national scale. As I said earlier, many of the country's regional capitals were involved, from Zghouta and Tripoli to the north, down to Sur and Nabati in the south, and then from Beirut and other coastal cities to the Bahr. And this in return means that also all of the country's communities were also involved in the process. When you start zooming in, there is also the importance of protests that happened along and on main communication axes, such as highways and other regional roads. This can be explained by the fact that in the revolution process, you need the existing system to get interrupted, to be stopped, in order to start imagining something new. And when the state of normalcy is unjust, is unfair, and needs to change, then the easiest way to interrupt how the system functions is to interrupt communication routes. It automatically interrupts everything else as a consequence.
What started or what made this uprising revolutionary is the mass strike, if you want, which was road closures. And that was beyond the squares. And it is what made the squares possible. It's by not allowing people to get to work that people flock to the squares. But I think this is an aspect that needs to be explored more in thinking about this link between the geography of blocking roads and labor, and how strike, or the return of the mass strike in different ways, was actually at the core of what happened, even if it wasn't declared by a general federation of unions, or it was indirect, but it was really the core of what happened.
The only thing and the best thing I remember about the protest is experiencing a space that wasn't accessible before, which is the road, the highway. I've never been as a pedestrian to a highway. And it was very symbolic to me because finally we claimed a public space, which is public, and we had access to a public space. This is the highlight of the protest for me. And on another hand, it was also an opportunity to think that we didn't have actually public spaces to protest at, so the street was the only way we had to go there. And also the symbolism of cutting the roads, having everything stopping, because we had to stop everything and look at the situation then. So yeah, this is for me the highlight of the protest.
For me, the fact that it was decentralized, that there was I think there was different aspects. There were gatherings and marches and protests in the Martyr Square in Beirut, in Tripoli, in the big squares. There were also the people who saw all of these gatherings on social media, on TV, And we're like, okay, we're doing the same thing. They took, they brought tires, they started burning tires all around the highway because we want the protests to go on. So they did that, and they promoted that you can protest from anywhere. So people started going out to the highway that's closest to their city. Like in our case in Batroun, we kind of closed the roads, put up blockades, closed it with our own cars because we didn't want anyone to go to work the next day. And I think the importance of this was that people were not always able to go to Beirut or access these big squares because of the reason we were protesting was financial, was economic unrest, and everything was, the prices were inflating. So to afford to go to these protests would mean that we don't need to protest. So the fact that these locations were spread out and available in almost every area, that's very significant. Also, social media played like a very important role. It helped us like interconnect or group together all of these different locations, and we kind of communicated. We saw what was happening over there and kind of reacted to it.
The revolt made us see our city in a different way, especially the non-places, the corners of the city that, like, who would have expected us to be laughing, crying, screaming in the middle of the highway? Like, no one. And this is what made it very special, because we were appropriating the spaces and being ourselves for a short period of time.
What I thought was interesting, being someone who drives a lot and uses maps a lot, it was very interesting opening Google Maps and seeing all these red lines linking all of the coast together, all of the areas together. So it kind of shows how spread out it was. Of course, in some places it was way more active, but that also implies how important this specific area is, or how many people there actually live there. But it's very interesting to see that it was spread out like a network, like a really connected network. And this connection, despite the fact that this connection was not maybe physical, maybe people were not actually going to other places, but there was indeed a high level of in-sync work in which people actually agreed on what's happening, and they just implemented it in their own space, and kind of at one point asserted the fact that this is our city or our town or our road, and we're actually we're reclaiming it, since Lebanon does not have public space. Airspace in Lebanon is actually private. So for us to see people taking the roads and actually living there for weeks and months, this is important, because we're reclaiming space that is rightfully ours and that should be invested for our own good.
The protests led to the appropriation of different spaces that weren't necessarily public spaces, weren't spaces that we used to go to, that they were spaces that were forgotten. From my personal experience, I had the chance to experience the highway, which, especially in Junior, the highway is always congested. There's always traffic. There's always big malls and shopping centers. We didn't really feel. We kind of forgot that this place belonged to our city of Junior. I remember when I walked on the highway, I drove, every day I drive on the highway, but when I walked on the highway, I kind of discovered a new place in my city. And I think it's important because before the 2019 protests, all the protests in Lebanon, they were held in Beirut. There was this confinement to political life, and all the protests in Beirut, in the place of martyrs, Sahat Shuhada. I think the protests gave the Lebanese people the chance to revolt in their own area, to block the highway, to limit the access to their own space, to their own region, to in a way convey this feeling of discontent with the government and the corruption. It's a way of decentralization of the political life from Beirut.
It was also like a dream, seeing everyone in the south, in Tripoli, in the north, and in Mount Lebanon, and also in Beirut. I grew up with all the events happening only in Beirut. Growing up in the Mount Lebanon area, I was not really involved, and my parents was not really involved in what's happening in Beirut. So when it happened everywhere in the country, so everyone was really involved, and it touches everyone. So this is one more reason to approve that it was like broad, it was for everyone, and this was the hope of everyone.
The decentralized aspect of the protest was extremely important. I remember vividly, we convened endless meetings in Batroun asking people, do you want us to join the movement in Beirut, Jbeil, Zouk, or do you want us to stay here? And they were like, no, let us stay here. So this shows you something. First, people were comfortable protesting from their comfort zone, but at the same time, they were encouraged to do so because people in different cities were also protesting. So the geography meant, okay, now I'm comfortable protesting here because I have my compatriots protesting in Tripoli, but also in Beirut and in the south. So it was linked, but it wasn't linked at the same time. So that's what was interesting. It's dual nature, in my opinion.
Et c'est comme ça que 2019 arrive dans un contexte où la politisation de la société civile est déjà enclenchée par 2015. Et c'est pour ça que 2019, malgré son échec visible à renverser le pouvoir, est un mouvement qui s'est manifesté dans tout le Liban, contrairement à 2015 qui n'était qu'à Beyrouth, et surtout contrairement à 2005 qui était certes un mouvement national, mais qui s'est passé juste à Beyrouth, sur les deux places de Beyrouth, la place des Martyrs et la place Riyad al-Salah. 2019, ces deux places qui en 2005 proposaient des visions opposées du Liban, en 2019, tout le monde est sur les deux places, toute classe sociale confondue, toute communauté confondue, toute idéologie et idées politiques confondues, se sont retrouvés dans les rues, dans les deux places, mais aussi dans tout le Liban. En 2005, des bus affrétés par les partis politiques ramenaient des gens à Beyrouth pour manifester, que ce soit d'une coalition ou de l'autre. En 2019, il n'y avait pas de bus, ou alors c'était des bus organisés par les manifestants eux-mêmes, par les groupes eux-mêmes, et les gens manifestaient là où ils étaient. Les routes étaient coupées, les places de la révolution étaient créées un peu partout dans le Liban. Et c'est ça qui fait de 2019 un vrai mouvement horizontal, un vrai mouvement donc révolutionnaire, un moment révolutionnaire.